I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Andrew Bingham.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I am grateful to the Speaker for giving me the chance to raise with the Minister responsible for roads, especially at what is a particularly difficult time with prevailing weather conditions probably occupying his thoughts more than most things at the moment, the vital need for a bypass around the village of Tintwistle and the surrounding area in my constituency. As the final Parliamentary Act of 2010, I am also grateful to my honourable friend the Minister for attending this evening at a time when, like many of our colleagues, I'm sure he would be rather heading off home to his family and his constituents. Mr Deputy Speaker, the relative serenity in the chamber tonight is something that many of my constituents living adjacent to the A57 and the A628 in Glossop and Tintwistle crave for. Every day, about 36,000 commuting cars meet heavy lorries driving through the two places, creating severe traffic jams and pollution on and around these two trunk roads. They are ruining some stunning landscapes and shaking parts of the village of Tintwistle to their very foundations. It is also having a knock-on effect as the congestion forces many other vehicles onto the small back roads through tiny villages such as Charlesworth, pushing further congestion and traffic dangers into a wider area. When I made my maiden speech on the 8th of June this year, I stressed the urgent need for this scheme. I recognised then that the money is tight and will be for some time, but subsequently I have had the Prime Minister's assurance that some £30 billion is available for transport investment, which means that there will be schemes that can go ahead. I hope to get the Minister to see that this scheme tonight should be one that gets the green light. Mr Deputy Speaker, the need for a bypass is not new. When researching for this debate, I found a parliamentary question and answered in this House in 1962. The then Minister's response informed the House that a scheme for the improvement of this road was included in the 5-year Trunk Roads programme. So, for almost 50 years, my constituents have been given such promises. For almost 50 years, they have put it with the congestion, the rumbling of around 4,000 heavy good vehicles a day, pounding through their villages and past their schools. And for almost 50 years, they have been told yes, but not now, later. Mr Deputy Speaker, the need for this bypass is older than I am. My aim tonight is to convince the Minister not that Tintwistle and Glossop need a bypass, as I will explain, that case is already made. Instead, I hope to convince him that they have a compelling case for being one of those sites that will be developed during this round of spending. And if I cannot get him to agree to that tonight, then I look to him to confirm that at the very least he will agree to come to my constituency and see the need for himself. He could, of course, take the quick and easy option, give the scheme the go-ahead today. After all, it is Christmas, and miracles have happened at Christmas in the past. However, if he's in need of further persuasion and agrees to come to my constituency, he would see why the Highways Agency is so convinced that a bypass is the only way forward. The status quo is untenable and detrimental not only to the local communities, but also to the local and regional economy. The plans for this bypass in the area date back to the 1990s, following the publication of the 1989 Roads for Prosperity White Paper. A route was chosen in October 93, but then plans were put on hold in 1996 when the National Road Building Programme was revised. So government ministers from several administrations have visited the High Peak, seen the beauty of the area and how it and the lives of the people who live there were being badly affected by the constant stream of traffic. They each recognise the importance of such a scheme. Gaining the support from the top has not guaranteed action, though. I understand that one minister made the journey, promised that something would be done, but was then sacked on his journey back to London. A former Transport Minister, Glenda Jackson, according to Lord Pendry, the former member for Saleybridge and Hyde, visited the area, tried to cross Manchester Road to attend a meeting of the then Tintwistle Parish Council officers, whereupon she narrowly escaped being knocked down by a truck. Unsurprisingly, this proved to be a very persuasive argument, and in 1998, the Labour government published a new deal for trunk roads in England, which included the bypass. Then more difficult arguments started to emerge as the prepared route for a bypass became the issue. The new road entered the Peak District National Park, whose representatives naturally raised concerns. However, many objections were also raised by people who weren't familiar with the area and assumed that all of the new bypass would be in the National Park. The Highways Agency's submission to the regional planning bodies in November 2002 concluded that there was no realistic alternative to a bypass if we were to solve the problems that exist. A public inquiry was convened in 2007 but adjourned indefinitely in 2008 after the Highways Agency admitted that it had submitted incorrect data. Later that year, the scheme was officially abandoned as the cost of undertaking the project had escalated and funds had been redirected to other areas. Some £20 million had been spent on investigations to this point, an utter waste of public money, spent raising and then dashing the hopes of local people that the misery they had endured daily had an end in sight. Indeed, my other friend the Minister has actually tabled questions on this in the previous Parliament, I believe. So, £20 million already spent, 50 years of acceptance that the route is a problem and something needs to be done. Yet the sad story, which is the Mottram and Tintwistle bypass, like the traffic through the villages, rumbles on. The problem that a bypass is needed to address can clearly be identified, and I will take a few minutes to outline them. Many will recognise part of the A57 by another name, the Snake Pass. Particularly with the snow we're having at the moment, it's often mentioned on the radio. It's the name given to the higher reaches of the road, which is notoriously dangerous as it duly snakes across the Pennines. This route, which takes motorists from the M67 motorway through the centre of Glossop and onto Sheffield, is one of the busiest A roads in the country. Linking Greater Manchester with Sheffield and South Yorkshire, passing through Glossop, there are numerous junctions and pelican crossings, which cause long delays for traffic, especially where on-street parking makes the road narrow, causing great disruption to the flow of the massive level of traffic trying to get through the town. The congestion created in Glossop is not only causing misery for motorists and residents alike, it is now having a detrimental effect on the economy of this famous old town. My constituent Gareth Lewis of Online Selling Limited tells me the congestion has stopped our business clients coming to visit us. It causes his company to hold client meetings as far as where's Manchester Airport in an attempt to avoid these jams. Mr Lewis goes on to ask, what is the point of us taking office space in Glossop when our clients refuse to visit due to the congestion? In my work with Glossopdale businesses, both before and since I was elected, this is becoming an all too familiar story. The second major road, which would be relieved by this bypass, is the A628. Again, known by another name, in this case Woodhead. This part is of particular concern to my residents, my constituents from the small village of Tintwistle, which together with the neighbouring Mottram in the neighbouring constituency gives the bypass its name. Tintwistle is a small Derbyshire village, which if it were to be a typical small Derbyshire village would be quiet and peaceful. However, it is not. The village shakes and shudders as wagon after wagon, car after car trundles through relentlessly. Another of my constituents, a resident of Tintwistle, Anthony Hall, wrote to me only last month to tell me that he had, and I quote, had counted over 50 heavy goods vehicles rumble past his home in the previous half hour. Many of these houses in Tintwistle are only a yard from the side of the road and their frontage. It is not something I would wish to tolerate. I'm sure it's not something the Minister would wish to tolerate, and it's not something I wish my constituents to tolerate for much longer either. So, whilst I have the ear of the Minister, and whilst not wishing to give him an exhaustive account of each and every bend of the A628, unless forcing him to beg for mercy would help my case, I would point out that at the eastern end of the A628, through the village of Dodworth, it has already enjoyed significant investment, significant road improvements. My constituents deserve the same concern, the same action and the same relief from this ongoing nightmare. Time and again, they have been told that the case for the bypass has been made. Time and again, they have been told that their misery will come to an end, that funds have been set aside and work will start. And time and again, programmes have been redrawn, money has been diverted, bureaucracy has got in the way, and yet still, the villagers tremble at the freight vehicles thundering through, and our businesses are choked to the point they cannot function. This bypass would relieve not one, but two major roads, connecting the west of the country to the east. It would provide relief, not for one, but for numerous small villages, both along the route and beyond, and it would make the existing roads immeasurably safer. I know there are environmental questions that will doubtlessly be asked, but as I watch the stationary cars and wagons belching out exhaust fumes into Glossop and Tintwistle and beyond, I am convinced that this could only be worse than having free-flowing traffic. Mr Deputy Speaker, my constituents have suffered too long and too much, and that is why, as a fitting end to my first year in this House, I have asked to bring this issue before Parliament this evening. It would be a Merry Christmas indeed for my local residents if we're able to make some progress tonight. Thank you.
Baker.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for High Peak, on securing this debate and on providing an opportunity for the House to debate funding for highways and specifically the bypass he so keenly wants for Tintwistle. This is an issue on which he's already made representations to me and on which it's clear he sets a high priority, and his constituents can take comfort that he is actively championing their cause here in the House. Let me preface my remarks by referring to the recent statements made by both the Secretary of State for Transport and the Chancellor and the related documents placed in the House Library on investment in strategic highway and on local major transport schemes. As the Chancellor stated in the October 2010 spending review announcement, the Government is determined to invest in Britain's long-term economic growth through areas such as transport, science and green energy, as these will help to ensure that the economy is broadly based and less susceptible to failures in one sector. It's for this reason that transport spending has been prioritised as one of the main areas of capital investment over the next 4 years. The Transport Secretary was able on the 26th of October to announce his plans for investment in strategic and local roads. On the strategic road network, he was able to commit to completing the 8 major road schemes currently under construction by 2015 at a total cost of £900 million, as well as a further £1.4 billion to fund new strategic schemes between now and 2015. In addition to that, we're able to provide over £1.5 billion for local authority major schemes over the same period. Around £600 million of this is for schemes already under construction or with conditional approval, including 2 schemes that will provide some benefit to the area, namely the £120 million Metrolink extensions from Chorlton to East Didsbury and from Droylsden to Ashton, and the £40.5 million Greater Manchester retaining walls maintenance scheme. On top of this, we're committed nationally to a further £900 million investment for new local authority major schemes. Taken together, this level of investment is greater than the average Department for Transport spend on local authority major schemes over the last 10 years. In taking our decisions, we've looked carefully at the value for money offered by schemes, their strategic value, whether for local, regional or national journeys, the degree of development and certainty of deliverability, as well as important non-monetised impacts, including, of course, environmental impact. As a result of this prioritisation exercise, we're satisfied that we've chosen the most appropriate strategic schemes to start between now and 2015, subject to the reviews announced by the Transport Secretary. Although we're committed to significant investment in both local major schemes and schemes in the strategic road network, it's inevitable we've had to prioritise and make some hard decisions, as I've explained, to select those schemes that offer the best value for investment. Now, turning to the specific issue which my honourable friend raises tonight, he's made a number of points about the long-standing ambitions to develop road solutions in Tintwistle and the surrounding areas. And both he and other local MPs have already contacted me to ask why a scheme to deal with this problem was not prioritised as part of the spending review. The reason why, as explained by the Transport Secretary on the 26th of October, is that a fundamental requirement used to decide whether a scheme would be considered for funding when spending review decisions were being made earlier this year was that the Department needed to have received a business case before the 10th of June 2010, the date on which the Transport Secretary announced a suspension on all scheme work pending the outcome of the spending review. Given that no agreed solution has yet been proposed for Tintwistle and the surrounding area, we simply don't have a scheme sufficiently worked out that could be considered for funding. It's also clear that despite our considerable investment, the number of schemes prioritised under the previous system of regional funding allocations is no longer affordable, and we're having to do our best to rationalise the programme. That's why the spending review reconfirmed that the 29 schemes of full approval, many of which are already under construction, would go ahead. In addition, 3 schemes have conditional approval, and we've placed a further 10 schemes in the supported pool and 22 schemes in the development pool. In addition, there are further 34 schemes in the pre-qualification pool. I should just make it plain to my honourable friend that the problem we've inherited, apart from the appalling financial situation with which she's doubtless familiar, was a complete overpromise by the previous administration of what could sensibly be delivered. They left us with an enormous pipeline of schemes all over the country, which, even if the economy had been working to its best effect, could simply not have been delivered within the resources available. And in that sense, I think they led many members and individuals up and down the country up the garden path because they simply couldn't deliver it. And therefore, what we've had to do in the Department for Transport, and the Secretary of State's done specifically, is to bring the portcolours down, if I can put it in those terms, on the 10th of June, and to then consider, with the monies available, the schemes which had got past a particular point. And unfortunately, his scheme, for reasons he's familiar with, hadn't got past that point on the 10th of June. So that wasn't a commentary on the value of what he's proposing. It was simply a recognition as to how far the scheme had progressed through the pipeline by that particular point. And that's why we've got to the position we have now. I regret very strongly that people were led up the garden path by the previous government in the way they have been, and led to expect something which simply couldn't be delivered right across the country in many ways. And even though we've protected the transport budget significantly in the spending review, and the Transport Department has done very well on capital projects because the government recognises the value of investment in capital projects, even so, the enormous pipeline we inherited simply couldn't be delivered, even with that good settlement. Now, but I'm very sorry for his constituents who've had to wait 50 years, as he says, for a solution to this. And I fear I can't do much other than disappoint him tonight. But I do understand the issues he raises, and he's quite right to do so. On the particular problems in Tintwistle and the surrounding area, I fully appreciate that there is a long and complicated history to this matter, stretching back many years, with strong views both for and actually against as well the proposals. More recently, a full bypass of Mottram, Hollingsworth and Tintwistle was identified by the Highways Agency as a means to address the disturbance from high volumes of traffic on these sections of the A57 and A628. As you know, the local authority scheme known as the Glossop Spur was also being promoted by Tameside Metropolitan Borough Council and Derbyshire County Council to provide a link to Glossop from the proposed bypass, and was dependent on the Highways Agency scheme being constructed. A public inquiry commenced in June 2007, but in September 2007, errors were found in the Highways Agency traffic model, he referred to that, upon which the evidence for the scheme was based. That was clearly very unfortunate. Pending production of revised traffic forecasts incorporating new national traffic growth forecasts, the inquiry was adjourned in December 2007. In the following July, revised cost estimates were produced which showed the central scheme cost estimate rising to some 270 million, with a potential maximum cost of some 315 million. This made the scheme unaffordable under the then proposed timetable, and it was deferred by 4 years to 2016-17 in the North West Regional Funding Advice Programme, with the Glossop Spur consequently also deferred to 2017-18. These delays led the Highways Agency to recommend in March 2009 to the then Secretary of State that they should withdraw from the public inquiry, a recommendation which the Secretary of State at that time accepted. The scheme was subsequently removed from the Highways Agency's programme to allow regional partners to undertake further work to consider the most appropriate scope of future work to solve the transport problems in the area. There are no current plans, I'm afraid, to reinstate the Highways Agency scheme in the programme. However, the Highways Agency continues to monitor conditions on the A57 and A628 and will invest in future maintenance in line with its established approach for safe roads. I do understand the frustration felt by the member for High Peak at the ongoing difficulties being experienced on this section of the network. However, it's now a matter for parties to consider the options in the current funding environment. To put this into context, the total Department for Transport contribution requested for new local authority major schemes, which we are considering in the current spending review, is 1.7 billion, and that's after the June 10 portcolours came down. That's nearly double the available financing of 900 million for such schemes. We're working to reduce this ratio through improved funding offers from promoters and through sifting of schemes. But it does mean that we cannot at this point consider schemes other than those already announced for this spending review period, nor accept any new bids for schemes that have not been prioritised in the previous government's regional funding allocations process. But I want to look constructively to the future. We want to work in partnership with local communities to develop a new framework for the funding of major local transport schemes over time, one that will have a reduced role for central government and give a proper voice to locally elected representatives and business interests, with local enterprise partnerships individually or in consortia, playing a role in strategic investment choices in functional economic areas. It's in this context we intend to empower local communities with the ability to identify and invest in what they consider to be the priorities in the next spending review. So that's one avenue, is central government funding post-2015 if it carries on this way. A second avenue is through the creation of LEPs who are able then to influence priorities in local areas. There are other avenues that might be explored. These could include tax increment funding, details of which will be announced in due course, as well as a local sustainable transport fund for which I'm responsible, and details of which I announced recently. Now, while the latter is not designed to support the cost of a full major scheme, it would potentially fund a package of complementary measures which support economic growth and reduce carbon. In addition, for parts of the route Greater Manchester might choose to look to their own resources through the Transport Fund they have created as a possible solution, particularly if they're able to free up resources as a result of successful bids to the Regional Growth Fund or the Local Sustainable Transport Fund for other projects. There could be a knock-on effect where money is released through funding for other projects. In this respect, I understand that earlier this year, Tameside Metropolitan Borough Council, together with the Government Office for the North West, led a study group which included the Highways Agency in Greater Manchester to steer the development of an alternative integrated package of options, primarily in the Longdendale area, known as the Longdendale Integrated Transport Strategy, which I imagine my honourable friends are familiar with. I understand that Tameside have since consulted on a list of options, which included new and improved railway stations, though I have to confess, having looked at the map, I'm not quite clear where they would go. Perhaps my honourable friend knows that. A short bypass of Mottram, together with a revised Glossop Spur, and innovative new treatments for the existing trunk road, including new junctions, bus lanes, and reduced speeds. Of course.
He's correct in what he says about the smaller scheme, if you like. But when that was brought together by Tameside Council, they didn't have any consultation with High Peak, and a lot of the things that were on their proposals weren't in their power to give. They required Highways Agency consent, they required consent of Derbyshire County Council, and consequently, from my perspective, as a councillor, as I still am and was then, and now the Member of Parliament, it actually did nothing for High Peak, it did nothing for Tintwistle, it did nothing for Hadfield. So I appreciate what he says about the whole scheme of things. I understand the situation, but that idea, when it came forward earlier this year, to me just was not beneficial in any shape or form to my constituency.
Right. Well, I hear what my honourable friend says, and I'm sorry that that's the analysis which he has locally of the suggestions put forward in the transport strategy. I was trying to find some crumbs of comfort for him in a difficult situation. Anyway, as I understand, no final recommendations have been identified or proposed for that particular strategy anyway, but Tameside tell me they intend to publish the results of the consultation exercise, which they think they've had, early in the new year. I understand that prior to the spending review, Greater Manchester authorities also identified £100 million to fund the agreed outcome of this particular strategy, but that, of course, relied on a significant contribution from the regional funding allocation budget, which no longer exists. So it's up to them whether they want to proceed with their own funding for that. For the future, any new scheme to deal with the traffic problems in Tintwistle and the surrounding area will have to meet the challenge laid down by the Secretary of State in his October statement to compete for finance resources against other projects in future spending rounds. Serious consideration needs to be given into how schemes can be delivered more efficiently and economically, in other words, to get the cost down and the cost-benefit ratio up, and delivered where greater access can be made to alternative sources of funding, including the private sector, if that's possible. Now, I can fully understand my honourable friend's desire to see a positive decision on the funding for a solution to the transport problems in Tintwistle and the surrounding area. However, I hope he'll acknowledge that the government had to make some difficult decisions on the best use of the funding available for an unrealistically large number of competing projects. It will now be important to look at how schemes can be made more cost-effective and also to new funding sources and systems of funding. While I will continue to consider any future improvements which are put forward, any proposals for dealing with the transport problems in the area, I'm afraid I can offer no particular assurances at this stage regarding the future availability of funding for such proposals. He did ask me if I would come and visit his constituency. I don't wish to raise false hopes for the reason I've given tonight, but if he wants me to come and visit, I'm happy to do so and look at the problems firsthand. So I can't give him a Christmas present of a bypass, but I can give him a Christmas present of a visit, though I have to say that the precedent he referred to, whereby a previous minister went up there and got sacked on the way back, is not one to encourage such visits.